The bombardment of Terra had not stopped for 55 days. The walls of the Imperial Palace were gone. They were dust. Millions of loyal soldiers lay dead in the mud. The air was thick with grey ash and the smell of old blood. On the ground, a guardsman named Harl crawled through the crater. He had no ammo left. He had no water left. He held a broken radio. He listened to the static. There were no orders coming from the command center. There was only screaming. The sky above him was black with enemy ships. The biggest ship of all sat in orbit like a dark moon. It was the Vengeful Spirit. It belonged to Horus. Inside that ship, the fate of the human race was breaking. The Emperor of Mankind stood on the command deck of the Vengeful Spirit. He was hurt. His golden armor was cracked open. Blood ran down his side. It was bright red. It sizzled on the metal floor. Across the room stood Horus. Horus was huge. He was swollen with the dark power of the Chaos Gods. The 4 dark gods poured their magic into him. They wanted the Emperor dead. Sanguinius lay on the floor between them. The angel was dead. His white wings were broken and stained. The Emperor looked at his dead son. He felt a cold pain in his chest. It was not a physical wound. It was the death of hope. Horus laughed. The sound shook the steel walls. He raised his heavy claw. The claw was coated in dark energy. The Emperor tried to summon his psychic power. He reached for the warp to blast Horus back. But the warp was full of storms. The Chaos Gods blocked him. His mind pushed, but the energy flickered and died. The Emperor fell to one knee. He was tired. He had fought for thousands of years. He had tried to use logic and science to save humanity. He had tried to build a safe path. It had all failed. Logic had failed. Science had failed. The Emperor looked down at his shaking hands. He felt the minds of his people on Earth dying. He felt their fear. A new feeling rose up inside him. It was not the cold planning of a ruler. It was not the calm thought of a scientist. It was pure, hot rage. It was the anger of a father who lost his children. It was the anger of a man who saw his work ruined. The Emperor stopped thinking. He let go of his psychic control. He let go of his restraint. Deep in his genetic code, something clicked. It was an ancient switch. It was older than the Imperium. It was a biological limit that he had placed on himself long ago. The air in the room stopped moving. The laughter of the Chaos Gods faded into a confused whisper. The Emperor's black hair lifted up. It stood on end. A low hum filled the deck. It sounded like a massive engine starting up. The floor plates began to crack. Small rocks and pieces of metal floated into the air. Horus stopped laughing. He took a step back. He saw something he did not understand. The Emperor's eyes turned white. Then they turned green. Then they vanished into a blue light. The golden aura around the Emperor changed. It became jagged and violent. It looked like yellow lightning. The Emperor stood up. He did not use his muscles. The energy lifted him. His rage was a fuel. The universe shook. The Emperor opened his mouth and let out a roar that broke the glass on every screen in the room. The history of the galaxy had just changed path. The golden light on the command deck of the Vengeful Spirit did not stop growing. It became solid. It pressed against the walls like physical water. Horus blocked his eyes with his massive claw. The talon of Horus was a relic of evil power. It had killed Sanguinius. Now it shook. The metal fingers vibrated. Horus roared. He was the War Master. He was the chosen vessel of 4 gods. He did not know fear. He swung the claw at the Emperor. The blow was fast. It broke the sound barrier inside the room. It should have cut the Emperor in half. The claw hit the Emperor's shoulder. There was a sound like a bell cracking. The claw stopped. The Emperor did not move. He did not use a psychic shield. He did not use his sword. His muscle was harder than the ceramite armor. The dark energy on the claw sizzled and vanished. It burned away in the heat of the golden aura. The Emperor slowly turned his head. His eyes were blank teal. His hair flowed upward in a golden flame. He looked at the claw on his shoulder. He lifted one hand. He grabbed the talon of Horus. The metal groaned. The Emperor squeezed. The legendary weapon crumpled like paper. The blade snapped. The power generator inside the gauntlet exploded. Horus pulled back. He stumbled. His face showed shock. This was not the psychic power he knew. This was something physical. It was raw strength. The Chaos Gods screamed in the warp. They watched through Horus's eyes. They saw the golden fire. It hurt them. It was too bright. Khorne roared in anger because his champion was losing a melee fight. Tzeentch spun in confusion because this was not in the strands of fate. Nurgle's flies burned up. Slaanesh felt a new kind of fear. They tried to pour more power into Horus. The War Master swelled up. His muscles tore his armor. Purple light shot from his eyes. He swung his mace, Worldbreaker. The mace was the size of a man. It carried the weight of a planet. Horus brought it down on the Emperor's head. The Emperor caught the mace with one hand. He did not flinch. The floor plates under the Emperor melted. They turned into liquid steel. The Emperor tightened his grip on the mace handle. The weapon shattered. Fragments of cursed metal flew across the room. The Emperor stepped forward. He punched Horus in the chest. It was a simple punch. It had no technique. It had no magic. It was just force. The impact blew the back of Horus's armor out. The shockwave cleared the smoke from the room. Horus flew backward. He hit the far wall. The steel wall buckled outward 3 meters. Horus fell to the floor. He coughed up black blood. The blessings of the gods began to leak out of him. Rogal Dorn ran down the hallway. He was the Primarch of the Imperial Fists. He carried his heavy chainsword. He had teleported onto the ship to save his father. He was too late to save Sanguinius. He knew this. He felt the psychic death of his brother. He ran past the bodies of dead Terminators. The air in the corridor was getting hot. It smelled like ozone and burning hair. The gravity on the ship was failing. Dawn reached the heavy blast doors of the command sanctum. The doors were melted. They hung open. Dawn stepped through. He stopped. He saw the body of Sanguinius on the floor. His heart broke, but he pushed the feeling down. He looked up. He saw a golden monster standing over a broken pile of black armor. The monster looked like the Emperor, but it was too big. The muscles were too dense. The aura was violent. It crackled with yellow sparks. Dawn hesitated. He did not know if this was his father or a demon wearing his father's skin. The golden figure turned. The teal eyes locked onto Dawn. Dawn felt a pressure on his chest. It was heavy. It was the weight of a star. The Emperor blinked. The rage in the room lessened slightly. He recognized his son. He pointed a finger at the body of Sanguinius. Then he pointed at Dawn. The order was silent but clear. Take him. Go. Dawn moved. He grabbed the body of the angel. The Emperor turned back to Horus. Horus was trying to crawl. The Chaos Gods were leaving him. They were fleeing the golden light. Without their power, Horus was just a broken man. He looked up at his father. His eyes were clear for the first time in years. He opened his mouth to speak. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to explain. The Emperor did not listen. The time for words was gone. The Emperor raised his hand. A sphere of yellow energy formed in his palm. It was small, the size of a marble. He flicked it forward. The sphere hit Horus. There was no explosion. There was only erasure. The body of the War Master turned into dust. The soul of the War Master turned into nothing. The Emperor stood alone in the silence. The ship began to shake violently. The energy the Emperor was releasing was too much for the reactor. The vengeful spirit began to break apart. Ken Tet. The bridge crew of the vengeful spirit were dead or insane, but the systems were still running on auto. Alarms screamed across the fleet. Abaddon stood on the bridge of his own ship, the vengeful spirit's escort. He looked at the sensor screens. The flagship was glowing. It looked like a second sun had appeared in low orbit. The void shields of the flagship collapsed. The hull plating turned red, then white. Abaddon shouted orders. He wanted to know what was happening. The tech priests on his deck were seizing. Their implants were frying. The code coming from the flagship was nonsense. It was just a high-pitched scream of binary. Abaddon looked out the viewport. He saw a beam of golden light shoot out of the vengeful spirit. It punched through the hull. It sliced through a nearby cruiser. The cruiser broke in half. The beam was not a weapon. It was just the Emperor venting his excess energy. Abaddon felt a cold pit in his stomach. Horus was gone. He could feel the absence. The dark gods were gone. The unity of the traitor fleet shattered in 1 second. On the surface of Terra, the war stopped. The space marines of the traitor legions felt their power vanish. The world eaters paused in their slaughter. The nails in their heads stopped biting for a moment. They looked up. The sky was changing. The dark clouds of chaos were burning away. A hole opened in the storm. Golden light poured down. It touched the demons on the battlefield. The demons did not fight back. They dissolved. They turned into slime and vanished back to the warp. The light was toxic to them. It was too pure. It was too angry. Inside the Imperial Palace, the defenders looked up. Constantin Valdor leaned on his spear. He was the Captain General of the Custodes. He was exhausted. He had fought for weeks without sleep. He watched the sky. He felt the presence of his master. But it felt different. It felt dangerous. Valdor tapped his vox bead. He ordered all Custodes to pull back to the inner sanctum. He did not know what was coming down, but he knew it would need room. High above, Rogel Dawn dragged Sanguinius into a teleportation chamber. He punched the coordinates for the inner palace. The machine sparked. The energy form of the Emperor stepped into the chamber. The metal of the deck bent under his feet. The teleportation machinery whined. It was not built to transport this much energy. The tech priest servitor fused to the wall screamed as its circuits melted. The Emperor placed a hand on the console. The machine stabilized. The yellow lightning arced around them. There was a flash of light. They were gone. The vengeful spirit groaned one last time. The main keel snapped. The massive ship began to fall out of orbit. It tumbled down towards the planet. It was a burning wreck. The symbol of the rebellion was dead. The teleport flare appeared in the Sanctum Imperialis. It was brighter than a nuclear blast. The blast doors blew outward. Dust filled the vast room. Malkador the Sigillite sat on the golden throne. He was a dried husk. His skin was grey. He was crumbling into ash. He was holding the webway gate shut with his mind. He was dying. He opened his eyes. He saw the Emperor emerge from the smoke. Malkador smiled. His teeth were loose. He tried to speak. He wanted to say he had done his duty. He wanted to say the gate was closed. But then he saw the glow. He saw the jagged aura. He saw the green eyes. Malkador's smile faded. He was the oldest human psyker alive. He knew ancient history. He knew things even the Emperor had forgotten. He recognized the biological signature. It was a legend from the dark age of technology. It was a genetic myth. Malkador gasped. The strain broke him. His body disintegrated. He fell off the throne as a pile of dust. The webway gate behind the throne began to rumble. Without Malkador, The warp rift was opening. Demons pushed against the barrier. The Emperor walked forward. The stone steps cracked under his boots. He did not rush. He was calm in his rage. He looked at the golden throne. It was a complex machine of wires and psychic conduits. It was designed for a precise psychic mind. It was not designed for this. The Emperor sat down. The metal of the throne groaned. The connection plugs hissed as they locked into his armor. The Emperor closed his eyes. He slammed his energy into the machine. He did not use finesse. He used brute force. The psychic shockwave hit the planet. It did not just close the gate. It slammed the door shut and welded it. In the webway, the demons trying to enter were vaporized. The feedback loop traveled all the way back into the warp. It burned the edges of the Chaos Realms. On Terra, every psyker not sanctioned by the Imperium fell to the ground screaming. Their minds were overloaded. The Astronomicon, the guiding light for ships, flared. It usually shone like a lighthouse. Now it shone like a supernova. Ships on the other side of the galaxy saw the flash. Navigators went blind. The message was clear across the stars. The Emperor was alive, and he was angry. General Stone stood on the Eternity Wall. He was an officer of the Imperial Army. He had lost his regiment. He had lost his arm. He watched the burning wreckage of the vengeful spirit fall through the atmosphere. It crashed into the wasteland far beyond the Hive City. The mushroom cloud was massive. Stone looked at his men. They were dirty, bloody, and starving. They had been waiting to die. Now the enemy ships were turning. The traitor fleet was breaking formation. They were running. Stone did not cheer. He was too tired. He just sat down on a crate of ammo and wept. He did not know why the enemy was running. He just knew the shelling had stopped. In the sanctum, Rogal Dorn stood at the foot of the throne. He looked at his father. The golden aura had settled down, but it was not gone. It pulsed like a heartbeat. The Emperor's hair was still gold. His eyes were still teal. He did not speak to Dorn. He sat rigid. His hands gripped the armrests of the throne. The gold metal of the armrests had deeper finger marks in them. Dorn realized something terrifying. The Emperor was not trapped on the throne because he was weak. He was trapped because he had to focus. He had to focus on not breaking the world. The power inside him was growing. It was a biological reaction that had no off switch. Every second, the Emperor got stronger. Every second, he had to hold back more. Dorn signaled the custodies. He ordered them to seal the room. No one was to enter. No one was to see the Emperor like this. The lie would have to be told. The Imperium needed a ruler, not a monster. The traitor legions fled to the Eye of Terror. They did not retreat in good order. They ran like rats. The Iron Warriors, usually so disciplined, abandoned their artillery. The word-bearers dropped their unholy books. They felt the change in the warp. The gods were silent. The gods were hiding. This terrified the traitors more than any gun. The Space Wolves arrived in the system 2 days later. Leman Russ came to the surface. He found Dorn managing the cleanup. Russ asked where the Emperor was. Dorn lied. He said the Emperor was wounded. He said the Emperor needed rest. Russ sniffed the air. He smelled the ozone. He smelled the raw power. He looked at Dorn. He knew Dorn was hiding something, but he also saw the fear in Dorn's eyes. Russ did not push. He went to hunt down the stragglers. The cleanup took months. The bodies were burned. The walls were rebuilt. But the atmosphere on Terra had changed. The psychic pressure was constant. People had headaches. Everyone felt a low-level anxiety. It was the presence of the Emperor. He was awake. He was watching. He was seething. The High Lords of Terra met in secret. They did not know what to do. They could not receive orders from the throne. The custodies barred the door. The only orders coming out were simple binary bursts from the throne's cogitators. They were not policy. They were resource demands. The Emperor demanded materials to repair the throne. He demanded specific alloys. He demanded food. The nutritional paste was piped directly into the throne room. Tons of it. The Emperor was consuming biomass to fuel the transformation. The mechanism of the throne was modified by the Fabricator General under gunpoint from Valdor. It became a life support system, but not for a dying man. It was a feeding system for a living god. Valdor stood guard inside the room. He watched his master. The Emperor did not sleep. His eyes remained open. Sometimes the aura would flare up and the room would shake. Valdor would tighten his grip on his spear. He wondered how long the Emperor could control it. He wondered what would happen if the Emperor let go. The history books would say the Emperor ascended. They would say he watches over mankind. They would not write about the golden fire that melted the stone. They would not write about the rage that kept the demons at bay. This was the new reality. The Imperium had won the war, but it had lost its leader. In his place was a battery of infinite power. The Golden Throne was no longer a seat of governance. It was a cage, and the thing inside the cage was the most dangerous weapon in the universe. The silence of the throne room was heavy. The age of the Imperium had ended. The age of the Super Saiyan had begun. 10 years had passed since the Siege of Terra. The rebuilding was slow. The scars on the planet were deep. But the deepest scar was in the sky. The Astronomicon was the psychic beacon used for space travel. It used to be a steady light. Now it was a raging fire. It pulsed with the heartbeat of the Emperor. It was jagged and bright. Navigators on ships screamed when they looked at it. Their third eyes burned out after a few months of service. The light did not just guide ships. It pushed them. It made space travel faster, but it made it dangerous. If a ship got too close to the Sol system, the psychic pressure crushed the crew's minds. The Imperium was winning its wars, but it was terrified of its king. Roboute Guilliman returned to Terra. He was the Primarch of the Ultramarines. He had missed the siege. He carried a heavy guilt. His fleet docked at the high anchor. He looked down at the throne world. The clouds were swirling in unnatural patterns. They formed spirals around the Himalaya mountains. There was a golden glow coming from the surface that could be visible from orbit. It looked like a radioactive crater. Guilliman took a shuttle down. He did not speak to his sons. He needed to see his father. He landed at the Imperial Palace. The walls were rebuilt, but they were different. They were thicker. They were lined with lead and black stone. The custodies stood guard. They did not look like proud guardians anymore. They looked like jailers. Their armor was scorched. The paint on their shoulder pads was peeled away by heat. Guilliman met with Constantin Valdor outside the Eternity Gate. Valdor looked old. Custodies were not supposed to age, but the stress had withered him. He leaned heavily on his spear. Guilliman asked to see the Emperor. Valdor shook his head. He said it was not safe. The energy levels were too high. Guilliman insisted. He was the Lord Commander. He had to know the truth. Valdor opened the small service door. He did not open the main gate. The main gate was welded shut. They squeezed through the thick adamantium passage. The heat hit Guilliman immediately. It was a dry, electric heat. It tasted like copper. The air was buzzing. They entered the Sanctum Imperialis. The room was vast. It was filled with machinery. Thousands of thick cables ran across the floor. They hummed with power. Coolant pipes hissed. Steam filled the air. In the center sat the Golden Throne. It was no longer a chair. It was a mountain of technology. And in the center of the machine sat the Emperor. He had changed. He was not a skeleton. He was massive. His muscles had grown. They strained against his golden armor. His skin was not pale. It was flushed red with blood flow. His hair was floating in a permanent updraft of energy. It was bright yellow. His eyes were open. They were blank teal lights. He did not blink. He stared at the far wall. The air around him distorted. It looked like heat haze on a desert road. Guilliman walked forward. The pressure on his mind was immense. It felt like standing next to a plasma reactor with the shielding off. He fell to one knee. He tried to speak. He said, "Father, I have returned." The Emperor did not move his head, but the humming sound in the room changed pitch. It went deeper. A voice spoke in Guilliman's head. It was not a sentence. It was not words. It was a feeling. It was a demand for efficiency. It was a demand for order. It was pure, unfiltered command. Guilliman gasped. His nose began to bleed. He understood. The human part of his father was buried deep. The thing on the throne was a biological weapon. It was a creature of pure power. It did not care about love. It cared about victory. Guilliman left the room. He was shaking. He met with the High Lords of Terra. They were frightened men and women. They told him the problem. The Emperor was eating the planet's resources. The throne required massive amounts of energy to run the cooling systems. If the cooling failed, the Emperor's aura would melt the crust of the Earth. They were feeding the reactor with raw matter. Old buildings, broken ships, mountains of rock. The Mechanicus was breaking down the history of Terra just to keep the fan running. And the Emperor needed food. He needed biomass, not the psychic souls of the old plan. He needed calories. The agriculture of 3 agri-worlds was dedicated solely to producing nutrient paste for the throne. It was pumped in through tubes. The Emperor metabolized it instantly. The first catastrophe happened 3 months later. It started with a mistake in the paperwork. The Departamento Munitorum was overwhelmed. A scribe missed a decimal point. A supply fleet carrying coolant gas was delayed. It was sent to the wrong system. The coolant reserves on Terra dropped to critical levels. The Fabricator General of Mars, Kane, sent a desperate warning. He said they had 4 hours of coolant left. If the tanks ran dry, the containment field would fail. Guilliman ordered the fleet to turn around, but they were too far away. He looked for alternatives. There were none. The heat in the inner sanctum began to rise. The sensors screamed. The golden aura around the Emperor expanded. It burned through the first layer of shielding. The ground shook. In the hive cities outside the palace, the temperature spiked. It went from a mild day to boiling in minutes. Water evaporated from the reservoirs. People fell to the ground, fainting from heat stroke. The Emperor was not doing this on purpose. He was just existing. His body was a star. Without the coolant to dampen him, he was cooking the planet. Guilliman made a cold choice. He looked at the orbital plates floating above the palace. They were massive stations. They held housing for millions of wealthy citizens. They also held water reserves and ice blocks for the upper atmosphere climate control. Guilliman ordered the Navy to shoot them down. The captains hesitated. Guilliman screamed the order. The macro cannons fired. The orbital plates were shattered. Millions of tons of ice and metal debris fell from the sky. They crashed into the palace district. The impact was devastating. But the ice shattered on the hot shield of the sanctum. It turned into massive clouds of steam. The steam sucked the heat out of the air. It was a crude, brutal solution. Millions of people in the lower hives drowned in the sudden flood, or were crushed by debris. But the temperature in the throne room dropped. The sensors stabilized. The immediate danger passed. The cost was high. The people of Terra were angry. They did not understand what had happened. They only knew that the sky had fallen on them. Riots broke out in the Hive Primus. Millions of starving, wet, angry citizens marched on the palace walls. They chanted for food. They chanted for answers. They held up signs of the imperial truth. They did not know their god was the one burning them. Guilliman stood on the wall. He watched the ocean of people. He knew he could not shoot them all. It would destroy the morale of the Imperium. He tried to speak to them over the voxcasters. He asked for calm. They threw rocks. They threw firebombs. Then the Emperor woke up. He felt the disorder. He felt the chaos of the riot. To his enhanced mind, disorder was an enemy. It was a flaw. The golden light in the sanctum pulsed. A wave of psychic pressure swept out from the palace. It passed through the walls. It hit the crowd. It was not a physical force. It was a mental one. It was the concept of submission, forced into millions of brains at once. The rioters stopped. They dropped their rocks. They fell to their knees. Their eyes went blank. They did not cheer. They did not pray. They just obeyed. The silence was instant. It was terrifying. The Emperor had lobotomized the aggression out of 10 million people in 1 second. Guilliman watched this. He felt the wave pass over him. It took all his willpower to stay standing. He looked at the silent crowd. They were getting up and walking back to their hab blocks in perfect lines. There was no talking. There was no emotion. They were drones. Guilliman realized the danger. The Emperor was not just a weapon. He was a tyrant of physics. If he stayed awake, he would turn the entire human race into biological robots. He would enforce order by erasing free will. This was not the freedom the Great Crusade had promised. This was slavery to a golden sun. The Mechanicus studied the event. They were fascinated. They saw the efficiency. They approached Guilliman. They proposed a plan. They wanted to link the Emperor's mind directly to the governance computers. They said he could run the logistics of the Imperium instantly. He could eliminate waste. He could optimize production. Guilliman slammed his fist on the table. He said no. He forbade it. He knew that if the Emperor connected to the grid, the machine logic would take over. The Imperium would become a hive mind. Guilliman ordered the tech priest to focus only on containment. Build better shields. Build better coolant systems. Keep the beast in the cage. But the galaxy did not wait. The orcs were moving. A massive wah, led by a war boss named Snagrod, was approaching the Segmentum Solar. They were drawn to the light of the Astronomicon. To the orcs, the bright jagged light looked like a challenge. It looked like a fight. They came in thousands of ships. They did not use complex tactics. They just burned their engines hard towards the light. The Imperial Navy met them at the edge of the system. The battle was fierce. The Navy was losing. The orcs were too many. They broke the line. A large orc-kill cruiser managed to slip past the blockade. It headed straight for Terra. It wanted to crash into the shiny palace. The planetary defense lasers fired. They hit the cruiser, but it was too thick. It was a flying asteroid of scrap metal. It was burning in the atmosphere. It was going to hit the Eternity Wall. Guilliman calculated the impact. It would breach the sanctum. If the sanctum breached, the coolant would vent. The Emperor would go critical. The planet would die. There was no time to intercept. Guilliman watched the screen. He prepared to die. Suddenly, the roof of the Sanctum Imperialis blew off. It did not explode from a bomb. It was pushed off. A beam of energy, thin and concentrated, shot up from the throne. It was yellow mixed with blue. It hit the falling orc ship. The ship did not explode. It disintegrated. The energy beam broke the atomic bonds of the metal. The orc ship turned into a cloud of loose atoms. The beam continued up. It hit the orc fleet in high orbit. It swept across the sky like a lighthouse beam. Every ship it touched vanished. The silence in the void was absolute. The orcs who were not hit panicked. Their primitive brains felt the predator in the dark. They turned their ships around and fled. They ran from the fight. Orcs never ran, but they had never fought a star before. The beam faded. The roof of the sanctum settled back down, melted and warped. The Emperor sat back in the throne. The sensors showed his energy levels had dropped slightly. He had expended power. He was hungry. The demand for nutrient paste tripled. The pipes groaned as the pumps worked overtime. Guilliman stood in the command center. He was pale. He had won the battle, but he had lost the argument. He could not control this. The Imperium was not safe. It was living in the mouth of a volcano. Guilliman made a decision. He would leave Terra. He could not stay and watch his father turn into a monster. He had to secure the borders. He had to build the Imperium strong enough to survive its own king. He wrote the Codex Astartes. It was not just a book of war. It was a book of decentralization. He broke the legions into chapters. He did this so that no one man could ever threaten the Emperor again. But he also did it so that if the Emperor ever went mad and broke the world, the Space Marines would be scattered enough to survive. He was preparing for the day the Golden Throne failed. Before he left, he went to the throne room one last time. The repairs were underway. Servitors were welding new plates onto the walls. The heat was still there. The Emperor sat motionless. His muscles were even larger than before. The armor was stretching. Guilliman looked to the face of his father. There was no recognition. There was only the blank stare of the being that had transcended humanity. Guilliman whispered a goodbye. He turned to leave. As he reached the door, the psychic voice hit him one last time. It was a single image planted in his brain. It was an image of the galaxy burning. It was not a warning. It was a promise. The Emperor was charging up. He was gathering energy. He was waiting for something. Guilliman walked out into the cool air of the night. He looked up at the stars. They looked small and dim compared to the horror in the palace. He boarded his ship and left Terra. He did not look back. The era of the Primarchs was over. The era of the bureaucracy had begun, built to manage the silence of a sleeping god who was not actually sleeping. The fleet of Ultramar leaving the solar system, while the Astronomicon burned brighter and brighter behind them. 500 years had passed since the Siege of Terra. The galaxy had not gotten better. It had gotten hotter. The Imperium of mankind was no longer just a government. It was a furnace stoking a single fire. That fire sat on the golden throne. The nature of the Emperor had changed the nature of the war. He was no longer a leader giving orders. He was a cosmic disaster that the High Lords of Terra had to manage. The atmosphere of Terra was gone. It had been burned away by the constant radiation of the Emperor's rage. The planet was now covered in a massive void shield dome. Inside the dome, the air was recycled. It smelled of ozone and dry dust. The oceans had boiled off centuries ago. The seabed was now a vast city of factories. Every factory had one job. They made coolant. They made liquid nitrogen. They made promethium. They pumped it all into the palace. The palace was a fortress of pipes. It looked like a machine organ. The noise was deafening. It was the sound of a planet trying to keep a sun from exploding. High Lord Vangorich stood on the observation deck of the Senate. He was the Grand Master of Assassins. He wore a suit that filtered his blood. The heat on Terra was killing everyone slowly. Even with the shields, the psychic radiation cooked cells. Cancer was the normal state of life for a Terran citizen. Vangorich looked at the holographic map of the Segmentum Solar. It was a web of supply lines. Thick green lines showed food convoys. They were coming from every agri-world in the sector. They were not feeding the people. The people ate corpse starch. The real food, the high-calorie grain and meat, went to the throne. The Emperor's biological form had grown. He was 12 feet tall now. His muscle mass was dense enough to stop tank shells. His metabolism was a fusion reactor. He needed biomass to maintain the golden form. If he did not eat, he drew power from the warp. If he drew from the warp, the Astronomicon flared and burned ships. So they fed him. They fed him the harvest of 100 worlds every day. The strategic situation had shifted. The threats were different. Chaos was quiet. The Chaos Gods were afraid. They did not like the anathema in his new form. The demons stayed in the Eye of Terror. They knew that if they manifested in real space, the golden light would find them. The Emperor could project his anger across light years. He could burn a demon world to ash just by thinking about it. But this power had a cost. Every time the Emperor lashed out, the throne room destabilized. The tech priests had to sacrifice thousands of servitors to repair the conduits. The Imperium had traded a war of soldiers for a war of logistics. They were not fighting to win ground. They were fighting to keep the battery charged. But a new enemy had appeared. They did not fear the warp. They did not fear the rage. They were the Necrons. In the dark space beyond the halo stars, the Silent King had returned. Zarek saw the golden light. He did not see a god. He saw a weapon. He saw a biological anomaly that threatened the fabric of reality. The Necrons hated the warp. They hated psychic power. And the Emperor was the biggest psychic event in history. To the logic of the Necrons, the Emperor was a cancer on the galaxy. He was tearing holes in physics. If he kept growing, he would consume the material universe. The Silent King made a plan. He would not fight the Emperor with soldiers. He would fight him with science. He would turn off the light. The Necron fleets moved into the Pariah Nexus. This was a region of space near the core. They began to build pylons. These were massive structures made of black stone. They were taller than hive cities. The pylons generated a field that dampened psychic energy. It was a null field. It calmed the warp. It made magic impossible. It made the soul feel cold. The Necrons wanted to build a fence of these pylons around the Sol system. They wanted to quarantine the Emperor. They wanted to cut him off from the warp. If they succeeded, the Emperor's power source would be severed. He would wither. He would die. Or worse, he would detonate. The first sign of the crisis was silence. Astropaths in the Vidar sector stopped screaming. Usually, astropaths screamed because the Emperor's light was too loud. Now they heard nothing. The messages stopped. The guiding light of the Astronomicon faded in that sector. Ships dropped out of the warp, blind. They were stranded. Then the reports came by courier boats. Black ships were appearing. They were shaped like crescents. They were destroying Imperial outposts. They were not looting. They were building. On every captured world, the Necrons planted a pylon. As soon as the pylon went active, the people on the world went numb. They lost their will to fight. They lost their emotions. They became cattle. The stilling had begun. Vangorish called a meeting of the High Lords. The room was tense. The Fabricator General, Ud Audia Raskian, was present via a holographic drone. His real body was too large to leave Mars. Raskian spoke in binary chirps that were translated by a servitor. He explained the threat. The Necron pylons were cutting the connection to the warp. If the connection was cut, the Emperor would lose his venting mechanism. The energy building up inside him would have nowhere to go. Raskian did the math. If the Necrons completed the ring around Sol, the Emperor would explode. The explosion would not just destroy Terra. It would destroy the solar system. It would create a new Eye of Terror, but one made of golden fire instead of purple shadow. The decision was made instantly. This was an existential threat. The Imperial fists were deployed. They were the Praetorians of Terra. Their chapter master, Thane, led the fleet. He took the Phalanx. The Phalanx was a massive star fortress, the size of a moon. It was the strongest ship in the Imperium. They moved to the Vidar sector. They had to destroy the pylons. They had to break the fence. The Imperial Navy sent 10 battle groups. It was the largest mobilization since the Beast War. The cost of fuel was astronomical. The Departamento Munitorum drained the reserves of 3 other sectors to power the fleet. This meant those other sectors were left defenseless. Planets were abandoned to pirates and rebels. The High Lords did not care. Nothing mattered except the throne. The war in the Vidar sector was brutal. The Imperial fists landed on the world of Aleph Null. The Necrons were waiting. The Necron warriors marched in perfect silence. Their Gauss flayers stripped the atoms off the Space Marines. The Space Marines fought with bolters and chainswords. But the Necrons kept standing up. Their metal bodies repaired themselves. The pylon on the planet pulsed with anti-psychic energy. The librarians of the Imperial fists fell to the ground, vomiting blood. They could not use their powers. The null field cut them off from the warp. Even the normal Marines felt it. They felt sluggish. Their reaction time slowed down. The brave fury of the Astartes was dampened by the cold science of the Necrons. Master Thane stood on the bridge of the Phalanx. He watched the battle map. He was losing. The Necron ships were too fast. They did not use shields. They used quantum shifting. They just were not there when the shells hit. The Phalanx fired its massive batteries. It destroyed a Necron Cairn-class tomb ship. But 2 more appeared. The Necrons were using geometry as a weapon. They were rewriting the laws of the battlefield. Thane realized they could not win a conventional war. The pylons were too strong. The null field was expanding. It was creeping towards Terra. On Terra, the Emperor felt the shadow. He sat on the throne. His eyes were open. He felt the null field touching the edge of his consciousness. It felt like a hand closing around his throat. It made him angry. The rage that fueled him spiked. The readout screens in the control room turned red. The heat rose. The coolant pipes began to rattle. The Fabricator General screamed orders. They increased the flow. It was not enough. The Emperor was generating more power than he could vent. He was pushing back against the silence. He was trying to shout down the pylon network. A psychic message formed in the mind of the Captain General of the Custodes. It was a simple image. It was a target. It was the location of the primary Necron pylon on Aleph Null. The Emperor wanted to hit it, but he could not reach it. The null field blocked him. He needed a conduit. He needed a lens. The Captain General understood. He ran to the communication array. He contacted Master Thane on the Phalanx. He gave a strange order. He told Thane to lower the void shields of the Phalanx. He told him to reconfigure the ship's warp drive. He told him to turn the drive into a receiver. Thane thought the order was insane. If he lowered the shields, the Necrons would destroy the ship. The Custodes repeated the order. It was the will of the Emperor. Thane obeyed. He was a son of Dawn. Duty was his life. He ordered the shields down. The Phalanx hung naked in the void. The Necron ships turned their weapons toward it. They prepared to fire. Back on Terra, the Emperor gripped the armrests of the Golden Throne. The gold alloy crushed under his fingers. He took a deep breath. The air in the sanctum rushed into his lungs. The sound was like a hurricane. He focused all his rage. He focused all the golden light. He pushed it out of his body. He pushed it through the wires of the throne. He pushed it through the Astronomicon. The beam of light that shot up from the Himalayas was blinding. It was not the usual diffuse light. It was a laser. It punched through the atmosphere. It traveled through the warp. It moved faster than time. The beam hit the phalanx. It did not destroy the ship. It entered the warp drive engines. The phalanx glowed. It turned into a sun. The metal of the station turned gold. The stone halls filled with yellow fire. The crew of the phalanx did not burn. They were protected by their loyalty. The energy passed through them. Thane felt the power of his father. He felt the infinite anger. The phalanx acted as a magnifying glass. It took the beam from Terra and focused it. It fired a lance of pure psychic energy at the planet Aleph Null. The beam hit the Necron pylon. The black stone did not break. It screamed. The null field tried to delete the energy. But the energy was not just magic. It was biological will. It was the stubborn refusal of humanity to die. The two forces clashed. Green lightning fought yellow lightning. The physics of the planet broke. Gravity reversed. Mountains floated into the sky. The pylon cracked. The Necron overlord on the surface looked up. For the first time in 60 million years, he felt fear. The beam pushed through. The pylon exploded. The explosion was not a chemical blast. It was a reality wipe. The shockwave swept across the planet. Every Necron on the surface froze. Their living metal turned into rust. Their green lights went out. The spirit within them was scoured away by the golden wind. The planet itself died. The atmosphere burned off. The oceans turned to steam. Aleph Null became a dead rock. The beam continued. It hit the Necron fleet. The ships simply ceased to exist. They were unwritten from history. The Silent King, watching from light years away, severed the connection. He saved his own mind, but he lost the fleet. The pylon network collapsed. The null field shattered. The silence broke. The roar of the warp returned. The astropaths on the phalanx screamed as their minds were flooded with the Emperor's triumph. Thane fell to his knees. The phalanx was cooling down. The gold glow faded, leaving the metal scorched and brittle. They had won. The blockade was broken. But the cost was not over. On Terra, the Emperor slumped back. He had released a massive amount of energy. He was empty. His body began to wither. The muscles shrank. The golden skin turned grey. The red alert sirens changed tone. It was a biological failure alarm. The Emperor was starving. He had burned his own calorie reserves to fire the weapon. He needed fuel immediately. The High Lords were in the room. They saw the readings. The Emperor's heart rate was dropping. If he died, the throne would fail. If the throne failed, the webway gate would open, and Terra would be consumed by demons. Vangorich looked at the logistics report. The next Agri convoy was 2 days away. It would be too late. He looked at the map of Terra. He saw the orbital plates that had been rebuilt. There were housing districts for the refugee workers. Millions of people lived there. They were tired, sick, and weak. But they were biomass. Vangorich looked at the Captain General. The Custodes nodded. He understood the math. 1 planet for 1 god. Vangorich gave the order. The orbital defense batteries targeted the refugee plates. They did not destroy them. They disabled the gravity engines. The massive cities fell from the sky. They crashed into the processing districts around the palace. The impact killed 10 million people instantly. The recovery servitors were already waiting. Massive reclamation dozers moved in. They scooped up everything. The twisted metal, the concrete, and the organic matter. It was all pushed into the grinders. It was processed into a slurry. It was pumped into the throne. The Emperor's body absorbed the nutrients. The grey skin turned pink. Then it turned red. Then it turned gold. The muscles inflated again. The heartbeat stabilized. The teal eyes opened. The aura flared up. The Emperor was back. He did not mourn the dead. He did not acknowledge the sacrifice. He was a force of nature. He was a fire that had been fed more wood. The High Lords watched in silence. They had saved the Imperium, but they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The news of the victory spread. The phalanx had destroyed the Necron menace. The Emperor had smited the ancient aliens. The ecclesiarchy declared a holy day. They called it the Feast of the Golden Lance. They did not tell the people about the refugees. They did not tell them about the cost. But the strategic reality had changed. The Necrons now knew the Emperor could be hurt, and the Imperium knew the Emperor could be used as a cannon. This changed the doctrine of the High Lords. They stopped trying to contain the Emperor. They started trying to aim him. They realized that if they fed him enough, if they focused him enough, he could kill anything. The strategic chain reaction was complete. The Imperium stopped being a civilization that protected its people. It became a mechanism to load a gun, and the gun was their god. General Stone, now a very old man, kept alive by juvenile drugs, read the reports on a border world. He saw the new tithe grades. The demand for organic material had doubled. He saw the request for rendering facilities to be built on hive worlds. He put the data slate down. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. He realized that the Emperor was not saving them. The Emperor was eating them. And the worst part was, Stone knew they had no choice. It was eat or be eaten by the dark. He signed the order to increase the tithe. He condemned 1 million citizens to the processors. He prayed to the Golden Throne. He prayed that the Emperor was full. But deep down, he knew the Emperor was never full. In the depths of the palace, the Emperor waited. He felt the Necrons retreating. He felt the fear of the Chaos Gods. He felt the despair of his own people. He did not care. He was growing. His cells were evolving. The golden hair on his head grew longer. The electricity around him grew more intense. He was preparing for the next level. He was preparing to leave the chair, not as a man, but as a storm. The galaxy had survived his awakening. It would not survive his walk. The fires of industry burning brighter on Terra, masking the darkness of the deed that kept the light alive. 2,000 years had passed since the destruction of the Necron fleet. The Imperium of mankind had entered a dark age. It was not a time of technological loss, but a time of spiritual crushing. The victory against the Necrons had taught the High Lords a terrible lesson. They believed that the Emperor was a weapon that needed to be loaded. The tithe of human lives had become the standard economy. Every sector in the galaxy sent ships filled with people to Terra. They were not settlers, they were fuel. The bureaucracy called them biomass units. They were processed, liquefied, and pumped into the Golden Throne. The Emperor consumed them to maintain his form. His golden aura had become a permanent feature of the solar system. It was visible from Pluto. It was a second sun, smaller but brighter, burning on the surface of the throne world. The Golden Throne itself had grown. It was no longer just a machine in a room. It had spread. The cables and pipes had grown like vines. They punched through the walls of the sanctum. They wound through the halls of the imperial palace. The mechanicus did not understand the machine anymore. They just patched it. They welded new plates over leaks. They diverted rivers of coolant. The palace had become a labyrinth of heat and noise. Deep in the lower levels, millions of tech thralls worked until they died of heat stroke. Their bodies were tossed into the furnaces to power the pumps. It was a closed loop of death. Adept Harl was a low-level worker in Sector 77 Delta. His job was simple. He watched a bank of pressure gauges. These gauges measured the flow of psychic dampening fluid. The fluid was a rare chemical that kept the Emperor's mind from burning out the circuits of the throne. It acted as a filter. It kept the raw rage of the Super Saiyan contained within the magnetic field. Harl had been on shift for 16 hours. He was tired. His eyes burned from the dry air. He looked at gauge 4. It was vibrating. The needle was flickering into the red zone. This meant the filter was clogged. The protocol was clear. He was supposed to shut down the line, vent the pressure, and replace the filter. This process took 3 hours. It required filling out 20 forms. If he did it, he would miss his ration break. He would miss his sleep cycle. Esenten, Harl looked at the gauge. He looked at the bypass valve. If he opened the bypass, the fluid would flow around the filter. The pressure would drop. The needle would go back to green. No one would know. The fluid would be slightly dirty, but the machine was huge. What difference would a little grit make? Harl made his choice. He reached out with his metal hand. He turned the bypass valve. The pipe hissed. The needle on gauge 4 dropped back to the safe zone. Harl smiled. He wiped his hands on his robe. He went to get his soup. He did not know that he had just killed the human race as it existed. The dirty fluid flowed up the pipe. It traveled 3 kilometers through the twisted guts of the palace. It entered the injection manifold of the golden throne. It sprayed into the central sarcophagus. The fluid contained microscopic particles of crystal residue. These particles hit the primary psychic conducting rod. The rod was made of psychoreactive plastic. It was sensitive. The grit scratched the surface of the rod. It created a microscopic fracture. The Emperor sat on the throne. He was in a trance. He was fighting 1,000,000 battles in the warp. He was holding back the Chaos Gods. He was pushing the Astronomicon. He was keeping the Tyranids confused. His mind was a storm of calculation and rage. Suddenly, he felt a sting. It was a small pain in the back of his mind. The scratch on the rod caused a feedback loop. The dampening field flickered. For 1 microsecond, the filter that held back his emotions turned off. In that microsecond, the Emperor's true feeling escaped. It was not a strategic thought. It was not a command. It was pure, distilled frustration. It was the screaming rage of a father whose children had failed him. It was the anger of a god who never wanted to be a god. The dampening field turned back on, but it was too late. The pulse had escaped. The psychic wave traveled out from the sanctum. It was not a physical blast. It did not break walls. It passed through matter. It hit the minds of the people in the palace first. The custodians were the first to feel it. They were genetically engineered to be loyal. They were resistant to corruption. But this was not corruption. This was their master. The wave hit Captain Valerius in the chest. He fell to his knees. His mind was flooded with golden fire. He felt the Emperor's anger. It was so pure it burned his synapses. Valerius screamed. He ripped his helmet off. His eyes were glowing yellow. He stood up. He was not himself anymore. He was a vessel of the Emperor's rage. He looked at his spear. He looked at the tech priest standing next to him. He saw the tech priest as a flaw. He saw him as a weakness. Valerius swung his spear. He cut the priest in half. The wave spread. It moved at the speed of thought. It hit the refugee camps in the orbital plates. There were billions of people there. They were hungry, sick, and hopeless. The wave entered their minds. It erased their hunger. It erased their sickness. It replaced everything with power. Their bodies began to change. Their muscles swelled. Their skin turned hard and bronze. Their eyes burned away and were replaced by teal light. They stopped being individuals. They became a mob connected to the single emotion of the Emperor. Destroy the weak, Destroy the enemies. Destroy the failure. On the surface of Terra, the High Lords were in session. The Grand Master of the Administratum was speaking about grain quotas. The wave hit the room. The High Lords froze. Their bodyguards turned on them. The guards did not hesitate. They opened fire. The High Lords were shredded by bolter shells. The massacre was absolute. There was no politics anymore. There was only the golden wrath. The wave continued to expand. It covered the entire planet in 10 seconds. Down in the maintenance shaft, Adept Har was eating his soup. He dropped his spoon. He grabbed his head. He felt the fire. He stood up. His mechadendrites whipped around wildly. He let out a roar that sounded like a beast. He ran toward the nearest airlock. He wanted to kill. He wanted to fight. He joined the river of screaming, golden people flooding the corridors. The planet of Terra descended into madness. It was not a riot. A riot has sides. This was a biological event. The population of Terra, 300 billion people, turned into a single organism of violence. They tore down the statues. They tore down the cathedrals. They killed anyone who was not glowing with the power. The weak died instantly. The strong became monsters. The energy released by this violence fed back into the Emperor. The feedback loop grew stronger. The dampener on the throne exploded. The control rods shattered. The Golden Throne stopped being a machine that contained the Emperor. It became a machine that amplified him. In orbit, the Imperial Navy fleet saw the planet change. The surface of Terra stopped looking like a city. It started to glow. The clouds burned away. The planet looked like a ball of molten gold. Admiral Cage watched from the bridge of the battleship Divine Right. He was terrified. He ordered the fleet to pull back, but the wave was still moving. It hit the ships. The crews on the lower decks, the press-ganged workers, began to scream. Mutiny broke out on 1,000 ships at once. The bridge crews fought desperately to seal the bulkheads. They vented the lower decks into space. Millions of crewmen were sucked into the void, still screaming, still glowing. Cage managed to jump his ship into the warp. He fled the system. He was one of the few who escaped. Back in the Sanctum Imperialis, the Emperor stood up. The wires tore out of his armor. The pipe snapped. The gold armor he wore was white hot. He did not look like a man. He looked like a tear in reality shaped like a man. He walked down the steps of the throne. He walked through the wreckage of the machinery. He walked out of the Eternity Gate. He looked at his world. It was a ruin. The cities were burning. The people were monsters. The sky was fire. The Emperor did not weep. He did not feel regret. He felt validation. This was the truth of humanity. They were a weapon. He raised his hand. The psychic noise on the planet stopped. The 300 billion infected humans froze. They looked up at the palace. The Emperor spoke a single word into their minds. Rise. The gravity on Terra shifted. The billions of people began to float. They were lifted by the Emperor's will. They floated up into the sky. They left the atmosphere. They drifted into the void. They did not die. The golden energy sustained them. They formed a ring around the planet. A ring of living golden warriors. They were the new Legion. The Emperor had discarded the Space Marines. He had discarded the Custodes. He had turned the population of his capital into an army of super soldiers powered by his own infinite anger. This event sent a psychic shockwave across the galaxy. It was stronger than the Astronomicon. Every psyker in the Imperium felt it. On 1,000,000 worlds, psychers' heads exploded. The weak minds could not handle the signal. This caused mass panic. Planetary governors lost control. The ecclesiarchy tried to explain it as a miracle, but their priests were burning up too. The infrastructure of the Imperium began to crumble. The central command was gone. Terra was silent. No orders came from the administratum. No tithe fleets were requested. The silence was terrifying. The space wolves were the first to investigate. The great wolf, Logan Grimnar, brought his fleet to the Sol system. They dropped out of the warp at the Mandeville Point. They saw the change. The sun was dim. The light of the star was being sucked into Terra. The third planet was brighter than the sun. Grimnar looked at the sensors. He saw the ring of bodies. He saw the energy readings. They were off the scale. He realized that this was not an invasion. This was an evolution. Grimnar tried to hail the surface. There was no answer. Just a low, static growl. Then the ring of bodies moved. A section of the golden human cloud detached. It moved towards the Space Wolf fleet. They did not use ships. They flew through space using psychic force. They were fast. They hit the escort ships like meteorites. They tore through the hulls with their bare hands. They were small, human-sized, but they hit with the force of anti-tank missiles. The Space Wolves opened fire. Bolters blew the golden humans apart, but there were too many of them. Millions. Grimnar watched his cruisers die. He saw a swarm of glowing humans cover a strike cruiser. They ripped the engines out. The ship went dark and froze. Grimnar knew he could not fight this. This was the Emperor's will. He ordered a retreat. The Space Wolves fled. They carried the news to the galaxy. Terra was gone. The Emperor had fallen to his own power. The Sol system was a death zone. The consequences were immediate and catastrophic. Without the central bureaucracy, the food shipments stopped. Hive world starved within months. Civil wars broke out in every sector. The Segmentum Solar became a fortress of the Golden Men. They did not expand. They just waited. They patrolled the system. They destroyed anything that entered. The Necrons, who had been regrouping, watched this. The Silent King calculated the energy output. He realized his error. He had tried to starve the fire. He should have put it out. Now the fire was a supernova. The Emperor remained on Terra. He did not rebuild the palace. He sat on the ruins of the mountain. He meditated. He was learning to control the new level of power. He had broken the limiter. He was a Super Saiyan too. His rage was no longer wild. It was cold. It was focused. He could see every atom in the solar system. He could move planets with a thought. But he was trapped. The energy required to sustain this state was immense. He was draining the sun. The sun was turning red. It was dying. If the sun died, gravity would fail. The system would fly apart. The Emperor realized he needed a new power source. He looked out at the galaxy. He saw the great rift of the warp. He saw the Eye of Terror. It was a wound in reality leaking energy. To the old Emperor, it was hell. To the new Emperor, it was a battery. He made a plan. He would not close the Eye of Terror. He would eat it. But to do that, he needed to move. He could not walk across the stars. He needed a ship, but no ship could carry him. He looked at the planet he stood on, Terra. It was a ball of rock and metal. It was scarred and broken, but it was his home. The Emperor slammed his hands into the ground. Golden lightning shot through the crust of the earth. It went to the core. He seized the iron heart of the planet. He began to install his will into the geology. He was not going to build a ship. He was going to turn Terra into a ship. Massive earthquakes shook the continents. The Pacific basin cracked open. The Himalayas rose up. Great engines of psychic force formed from the bedrock. The atmosphere was sealed by a hard shell of force. The Golden Men in orbit descended. They took positions on the surface. They became the crew. The Emperor was the pilot. The Emperor was the engine. The process took 50 years. The galaxy burned in anarchy while the Emperor worked. The Tyranids arrived in force. Leviathan, Kraken. They consumed the eastern fringe. They met no resistance from the Imperium because the Imperium was fighting itself. The Tyranids grew fat. They headed for the brightest light they could see. They headed for Saul. The Emperor felt them coming. He did not care. He was ready. The work was done. The sun was a small red ember now. It gave no heat. The Sol system was freezing. The gases of Jupiter had frozen solid. But Terra was bright. Terra was alive. The Emperor stood on the highest peak of the New World engine. He gave the command. The planet Terra broke its orbit. It pulled away from the dying sun. It left the habitable zone. It accelerated. It did not use thrusters. It used the warp. It tore a hole in space and entered the Imperium. The throne world was on the hunt. The Emperor was coming for the Eye of Terra, and he was bringing his planet with him. The loss of Terra from the material map was the final nail in the coffin of the old Imperium. The High Lords were dead. The bureaucracy was dead. The Astronomicon was gone. Navigators went blind. Warp travel became impossible for most ships. The galaxy fractured into 10,000 isolated systems. Darkness fell. The long night returned. But in the warp, a new star was moving. A predatory star. The demons of the warp fled before it. The Chaos Gods barred the gates of their realms. They knew what was coming. The anathema had become a nomad, and he was hungry. Adept Hal, or the creature that used to be Hal, stood on a ridge overlooking the engine plains of Terra. He did not remember the soup. He did not remember the valve. He only knew the song of the master. He watched the colors of the warp rush by overhead. He felt the joy of purpose. He was a cell in the body of a god. He looked at his hands. They were claws of gold. He was happy. He had made the right choice. He had opened the valve. He had set the god free. The earth disappeared. The solar system was empty. The planets drifted in the dark around a cold, dead star. The history of humanity as a settled civilization was over. The history of the Stellar Crusade had begun. The small choice of a tired worker had not just changed the war. It had changed the location of hell. The warp was not empty space. It was an ocean of souls and emotions. For millions of years it had been the hunting ground of predators. Demons swam in the currents, looking for weak minds to eat. The Chaos Gods sat on their thrones, laughing at the universe. But now the ocean was boiling. A new predator had entered the water. The planet Terra moved through the immaterium like a golden comet. It was surrounded by a shield of psychic fire. This fire was not magic. It was pure will. Any diamond that touched the shield did not just die. It ceased to exist. Its energy was consumed by the shield to fuel the engines. The Emperor stood on the summit of the Himalayas. He was no longer guiding humanity. He was driving a tank made of a planet. He could feel the direction of the Eye of Terra. It pulled at him. It was a wound in the side of the galaxy. It was where his son Horus had run to. It was where the enemies of his dream were hiding. The Emperor did not plan to close the wound. He planned to cauterize it. Inside the Eye of Terra, time did not make sense. Gravity was a joke. Planets were shaped like skulls or cubes. The Black Legion, the largest army of traitors, had made their home here. Abaddon the Despoiler stood on the bridge of his flagship. He was the war master now. He had spent centuries building a fleet to crush the Imperium. He looked at the tactical screens. They were showing something impossible. The boundary of the eye was stretching. The purple clouds of the warp storm were being pushed back. A bright yellow light was piercing the darkness. It looked like a sunrise, but it was coming from inside the warp. Abaddon felt a pain in his chest. It was the old fear. The fear he felt when the Emperor erased Horus. He shouted for his sorcerers. He demanded to know what was happening. The sorcerers were on the floor. They were bleeding from their eyes. They screamed one word: anathema. The planet Terra burst into the Eye of Terror. It did not exit a warp gate. It ripped through the fabric of the dimension. The shockwave shattered 3 nearby demon worlds. The golden light of the Emperor flooded the Eye. For the first time in history, the Eye of Terror was bright. The demons on the surface of the Black Legion world shrieked and burned. The light was radioactive to them. It was order imposed on chaos. Abaddon watched the golden planet approach. It was surrounded by a ring of debris. But the debris was moving. He zoomed the sensors. It was not rocks. It was people. Billions of golden humans floating in the void, circling their god. They were the Golden Men. They were the antibodies of the Emperor. The Black Legion opened fire. Their battleships launched magma bombs and cyclonic torpedoes. The weapons hit the golden shield of Terra. They exploded harmlessly. The Emperor did not even look at the ships. He was looking at the center of the Eye. He was looking at the tear where the Chaos Gods lived. But he was not the only one hunting. From the galactic south, a shadow fell over the stars. Hive Fleet Leviathan had arrived. The Tyranids had consumed a dozen sectors. They were driven by an endless hunger. Usually, the Hive Mind avoided the Eye of Terror. The warp was poisonous to them. But the Hive Mind felt something new. It felt a power source inside the Eye. It felt the Emperor. To the Tyranids, the Emperor was not a god. He was a super prey. He was a concentration of biomass and energy so dense that consuming him would evolve the entire species. The Hive Mind made a calculation. The reward was worth the risk. The Great Devourer turned its course. Billions of bioships flew into the Eye of Terror. They ignored the madness of the warp. They ignored the demons. They flew straight toward the golden light. The battle began as a 3-way collision. The Black Legion fleet was caught in the middle. Abaddon saw the bioships emerging from the smoke. He saw the golden planet rushing forward. He realized his war was over. This was not a war for territory. This was a war of nature. The Tyranid ships slammed into the Chaos Fleet. Tentacles of flesh wrapped around steel hulls. Genestealers boarded the cruisers. At the same time, the Golden Men detached from Terra. They flew through the void without suits. They did not need air. They slammed into the Chaos ships from the other side. They tore through the armor with their bare hands. They punched through bulkheads. They killed traitor Marines with a touch. On the surface of the golden planet Terra, the Emperor watched the Tyranids approach. He saw the massive hive ships. They looked like floating organs. He felt the hunger of the hive mind. It pressed against his mental shield. It tried to smother him. The Emperor smiled. It was a cold, terrible smile. He raised his hand. Lightning arced from the Himalayan peaks. It struck the nearest hive ship. The bioship convulsed. Its flesh boiled. The psychic feedback traveled down the synapse web. Smaller Tyranid organisms nearby heads exploded. The Emperor was not just fighting the ships. He was attacking the hive mind network. He was shouting louder than the swarm. But the Tyranids were adaptable. They learned quickly. The hive mind saw that the energy attacks were based on warp power. It deployed a new creature. Massive bioships called Norn Queens began to birth special units. These were giant brain bugs. They projected a shadow in the warp. It was a dampening field. It was similar to the Necron pylons, but biological. The shadow fell over Terra. The golden light dimmed slightly. The Golden Men slowed down. The Chaos Fleet, seeing a chance, fired everything they had at the Emperor's palace. The Emperor felt the shadow. It was heavy. It was like trying to breathe underwater. He stood up on his throne of rock. He closed his eyes. He reached deep into his genetic memory. He remembered the science of the dark age of technology. He remembered the biology of the Primarchs. He realized that relying on warp power was a weakness if the enemy could block it. So he switched fuel sources. He stopped drawing from the warp. He started drawing from his own physical mass. His muscles contracted. His cells went into hyperdrive. He began to burn his own life force to generate kinetic energy. The golden aura around him changed color. It went from yellow to red. It was the color of blood. It was the color of physical violence. The Emperor let out a roar. This was not a psychic scream. It was a physical shout that was amplified by the geology of the planet. The sonic wave hit the vacuum of space, carried by the escaping atmosphere of the dying chaos worlds. It hit the Tyranid brain bugs. The physical force liquefied them. The shadow in the warp broke. The golden light returned, brighter than before. The Emperor jumped. He did not jump a few feet. He jumped from the surface of Terra into the void. He propelled himself with telekinetic force. He flew like a missile toward the center of the Tyranid fleet. He crashed into the largest hive ship. He did not stop. He punched through the chitin armor. He flew through the acid blood. He reached the heart of the ship. He released a pulse of red energy. The ship expanded and exploded. The Emperor flew out of the wreckage. He targeted the next ship. He was a human bullet. He was destroying the fleet one ship at a time. Abaddon watched this from his bridge. He was speechless. He saw the god of the Imperium tearing apart a hive fleet with his fists. He saw the Tyranids trying to swarm him. Carnifexes the size of tanks floated in the void, trying to grab the Emperor. The Emperor ripped them in half. It was primal. It was not the warfare of the 41st millennium. It was the warfare of mythology. Abaddon realized there was no place for him here. The Chaos Gods were silent. They were hiding in the deepest rifts. They knew that if the Emperor saw them, he would try to kill them next. Abaddon ordered his ship to turn around. He ordered the Black Legion to scatter. They fled the Eye of Terror. They ran into the deep dark of the Ghoul stars. They became refugees. The Tyranids were losing. The Hive Mind had never encountered a prey item that fought back like this. Usually, prey ran or hid. This prey was eating the predators. The Emperor was absorbing the biomass of the Tyranids he killed. Every time he destroyed a ship, he absorbed the life energy. He was getting stronger. He was getting bigger. His armor had melted away hours ago. He was a giant figure of golden light and red muscle. He was growing to the size of a titan. The Hive Mind made a final decision. It could not win. It had to cut its losses. The Hive Fleet turned. It tried to retreat. It tried to leave the Eye. But the gravity of Terra was increasing. The Emperor was pulling them back. He was not letting them leave. He wanted to finish it. He raised both hands. He gripped the fabric of space. He pulled. The rift of the Eye of Terror began to distort. The edges curled inward. He was closing the door. The Tyranid fleet was trapped inside the Eye with the Emperor. The Golden Men swarmed over the remaining bioships. They entered the digestion pools. They poisoned the spawning vats with their golden energy. The Tyranids began to birth hybrids, twisted monsters that attacked their own kind. The Hive Mind screamed in confusion. The connection was severed. The Tyranids in the Eye went feral. They became animals. The Emperor floated in the center of the massacre. He was surrounded by the wreckage of 1 billion years of evolution. He had won. But the victory was not enough. The Emperor looked at the center of the Eye. The tear in reality was still there. The Chaos Gods were on the other side. They were watching him. He could feel their gaze. Nurgle was disgusted. Tzeentch was fascinated. Khorne was impressed. Slaanesh was terrified. The Emperor knew that as long as the tear existed, they could come back. He had to seal it. But a seal was temporary. A seal could be broken. He needed to fill the hole. He looked at his planet. Terra was cracked. The continents were broken. The core was cooling. He looked at the golden men. They were fading. Their energy was spent. He looked at himself. He was a being of pure energy now. He realized the final step. He did not need to go back to Terra. He did not need a throne. He was the plug. The Emperor flew toward the center of the warp rift. The energies of the Chaos Gods lashed out at him. Purple lightning and red fire. He ignored them. He flew into the singularity. He positioned himself in the doorway between the material universe and the warp. He expanded his aura. He pushed. He pushed against the walls of reality. He wedged himself into the hole. The pain was infinite. He was being burned by the fires of hell on one side and the freezing vacuum of space on the other. But he held. His golden light solidified. It turned into a barrier. It hardened into a crystal shell. The Emperor froze himself in a moment of eternal rage. He became a living statue in the center of the Eye of Terror. The effect was instant. The Eye of Terror closed. It did not vanish. It was plugged. The purple clouds disappeared. In their place was a golden star. It was a new astronomical object. It was visible from every planet in the galaxy. It was a beacon of pure static order. The light from this star washed over the galaxy. It was the Astronomicon of Wrath. On the other side of the galaxy, Roboute, Guilliman, stood on the bridge of his flagship. He was old. He had fought for centuries to keep the Ultramar region safe. He looked up at the sky. He saw the new star. He felt the psychic pressure. It was not the chaotic screaming of the old Astronomicon. It was a hum, a steady, low hum. It sounded like a generator. It forced clarity onto his mind. He felt his emotions dampen. He felt his logic increase. He looked at his crew. They were all standing still. They were staring at the light. They were calm. Too calm. Guilliman realized what his father had done. The Emperor had defeated chaos by removing the variable of emotion. The light of the new star suppressed passion. It suppressed fear. But it also suppressed love. It suppressed hope. Across the Imperium, wars stopped, not because of peace treaties, but because the soldiers lost the will to fight. Orcs in the Octaria sector stopped war-king. They became lethargic. They sat in their camps, confused, their aggression dampened by the golden light. The Elder in their craft worlds felt their psychic powers fade. The connection to the warp was blocked by the massive plug in the eye. The Tyranids outside the galaxy stopped approaching. The beacon was gone. The dinner bell had been silenced. The galaxy looked cold and dead to them. They turned away. They went to look for other galaxies where the food was warmer. The Imperium of mankind was safe, but it was no longer human. The bureaucracy on the remaining civilized worlds became perfect. There was no crime. There was no heresy. There was no art. There was no music. People went to work, they did their duty, and they died. They were ants in a colony. The golden men who survived the battle at the Eye drifted back to the colonized worlds. They became the enforcers. They were the silent police. If anyone showed too much emotion, if anyone showed a spark of chaos, the golden men appeared and removed them. Guilliman sat in his quarters. He tried to write in his journal. He tried to feel sad about the loss of his father, but he couldn't. The light from the golden star would not let him. He looked at the words he had written. Victory is absolute. Order is absolute. He put the pen down. He realized that Horus was right about one thing. The Emperor wanted to be a god, but he didn't want worshippers. He wanted components. In the center of the plugged eye, the Emperor remained. He was conscious. He was not asleep. He was trapped in his own victory. He was the wall that held back the dark. He could feel the Chaos God scratching at his back, trying to get in. He could feel the cold universe on his face. He had saved the human race from extinction. He had saved them from hell, but he had trapped them in purgatory. He remembered the days before the crusade. He remembered the simple days of being a warlord on earth. He remembered the taste of wine. He remembered the sound of a wolf howling. Those memories were fading. They were being replaced by the static. He tried to hold on to one memory, the face of Malcador, the face of Sanguinius. But the golden light burned them away. There was only the duty. There was only the hold. 1,000 years passed, then 10,000. The galaxy did not change. It was a clockwork machine. The species that relied on the warp died out. The Eldar went extinct, their souls trapping in the infinity circuits, unable to reincarnate. The Dark Eldar starved in Comora because they could not feed on pain anymore. The orcs devolved into mindless fungi. Humanity spread to every star. They built Dyson spheres. They built computers the size of moons. They solved every equation, but they never laughed. Then, one day, a small crack appeared in the golden crystal of the Emperor. It was not a crack caused by chaos. It was a crack caused by fatigue. Even a Super Saiyan cannot hold his breath forever. A tiny sliver of purple light leaked through. It touched the child on a hive world in the Segmentum Pacificus. The child blinked. The static in his head cleared for a second. He looked at a flower growing in the mud. He felt something. He felt joy. He smiled. The golden men sensed it instantly. They moved to intercept. But before they could reach the child, another crack appeared, and another. The Emperor was tired. The rage was fading. The battery was running dry. The golden star flickered. Across the galaxy, 1 billion people woke up from the trance. They felt fear. They felt anger. They felt love. The Chaos Gods on the other side roared. They pushed. The Emperor felt the pressure. He knew his watch was ending. He had bought them time. He had bought them 10,000 years of safety. But the cycle was starting again. He did not try to patch the crack. He was too exhausted. He let it break. He let the dam burst. The golden shell shattered. The Emperor's form dissolved. He finally let go. He died. He did not become a god. He just became dust. The Eye of Terror opened again. The warp rushed back in. The emotions returned. The wars started again. The laughter of the dark gods echoed across the stars. But the humans were different now. They had lived in the light. They had built technology that rivaled the Necrons. They had discipline hardwired into their genes. As the demons poured back into the galaxy, they did not find frightened cattle. They found a race of soldiers who had been waiting. They found weapons of logic and cold iron. The humans did not pray for a savior anymore. They did not look for a golden father. They picked up their rifles. They primed their plasma cannons. They looked into the dark, and they did not blink. Guilliman stood on his bridge. The hum was gone. The grief hit him like a hammer. He wept. He wept for his father. He wept for the silence. Then he wiped his eyes. He drew his sword. The Emperor was dead. The Super Saiyan was gone. But the lesson remained. Power is not a gift. It is a burden. And now the burden belonged to them. All ships, Guilliman said. His voice was hoarse but steady. Open fire. The galaxy burned again. But this time it burned with a fire that belonged to men, not gods. The age of the supernatural was over. The age of the War Eternal had truly begun. This ended with the death of the Emperor and the rebirth of a humanity that no longer needed him. The Sol system was quiet. It was a graveyard of history. The sun was a small red dot in the center. It gave very little heat. The orbits of the inner planets were empty. Mercury was gone. Venus was gone. Terra was gone. They had been consumed or moved during the Great Departure. Only Mars remained. The red planet was now the capital of the human race, but it was not the Mars of the old days. It was not a place of superstition and incense. It was a machine world of pure logic. The rust was gone. The surface was covered in silver plating. The forges did not chant prayers to the Omnissiah. They hummed with the math of quantum physics. Archivist Kale sat in the highest tower of Olympus Mons. He was writing the final entry of the Chronicle of the Gold. He looked out at the dark sky. He could see the scar in the galaxy where the Eye of Terror used to be. It was open again, but it looked different. It was smaller. It was ragged. It was like a wound that had healed and then been torn open again. The diamonds that came out of it were feral. They were starving. They looked for the sweet emotions of fear and hope that used to feed them. They found nothing. The humans of the new era were hard to eat. They did not scream when they died. They did not beg for mercy. They fought with a silence that was more terrifying than any war cry. Carl looked at the data slate on his desk. It contained the casualty reports from the Qadir sector. The number of dead was in the billions. Kale did not feel sad. He noted the efficiency ratio. The enemy had lost 3 times as much mass. It was an acceptable exchange. There were no statues of the Emperor on Mars. There were no temples. The ecclesiarchy had been disbanded 5,000 years ago. The concept of worship was considered a mental illness. It was seen as a waste of processing power. The Emperor was taught in history classes, but not as a god. He was taught as a biological singularity. He was an event. He was a nuclear reaction that had gone out of control. The teachers explained that the Emperor had broken the galaxy to save it. He had burned away the weakness of the human soul. He had left them with only the bone and the iron. Kale stood up and walked to the preservation field in the corner of the room. Inside the field was a relic. It was not a holy bone. It was a piece of armor. It was a single golden gauntlet. It had been found drifting in the void near the Eye of Terror. It was scorched. It was cracked. It was giant. Kale looked at the metal. It did not glow. There was no psychic aura coming from it. It was just dead matter. This was the proof that the people needed. The Super Saiyan was dead. The magic was gone. The demons called this era the Age of Ash. They hated it. They tried to corrupt men, but the corruption did not stick. A man who does not dream cannot be tempted by a dream god. A man who does not feel rage cannot be owned by the god of blood. The Chaos gods were slowly starving. They were becoming weak. They were fading into myths. The humans were winning the long war, but they were winning it by ceasing to be the humans of the past. They had traded their souls for survival. A ship landed on the pad outside. It was a sleek, grey vessel. It had no eagles on it. It had no skulls. It just had a serial number. Commander Agrippa stepped out. She was tall. Her skin was grey. Her eyes were cybernetic. She came to collect the chronicle. She did not salute Kale. She just nodded. She took the data slate. She asked if the record was complete. Kale said it was. He said that the story of the Emperor was finished. Agrippa looked at the golden gauntlet in the case. For a second, her cybernetic eye clicked. She hesitated. She asked a question that was not in the protocol. She asked if the Emperor had been happy. Kale looked at her. He thought about the records. He thought about the rage. He thought about the silence in the eye. He said no. He said happiness was not part of the equation. The Emperor was a weapon. Weapons are not happy. They are either loaded or empty. And now he was empty. Agrippa turned and left. The ship took off. It flew toward the fleet gathering at the edge of the system. They were going to the Ghoul stars. They were going to exterminate the last of the orcs. Kale sat back down. He deleted the file from his terminal. The history was recorded. Now it could be forgotten. He looked at the red sun. He felt a phantom pain in his chest. It was a tiny spark of an old emotion. It was loneliness. He suppressed it with a breathing exercise. He went back to work. The galaxy was cold, but it belonged to them, and that was enough.